Since 1878, we've forged talents, industrialized skills, and nurtured minds. We all face challenges, but it is how we come together to overcome them that counts. We work with educators, employers, and governments in over 100 countries to get people into a job, progress in the job, and onto the next job. We are apprenticeships, T-levels, technicals, and traineeships. We are engineering, health and care, and construction. We are aspiration, opportunity, and ambition. We are City and Guilds. No one is better qualified.
Hello and welcome to the City and Guilds and ILM AAC session looking at the future of blended learning and assessment in apprenticeship delivery, so specifically looking at how that's affected us and covering some of the impact of the reforms from the standards, but also looking at some of the COVID response as well. So we've got you captive for 45 minutes. My name's Sarah Bell. I'm the Propositions Director for City and Guilds and ILM, and I'm joined today by two of my colleagues who can introduce themselves. So handing over to Sarah.
Good morning, I'm Sarah Cooksedge. I'm a Digital Solutions Manager with the City and Guilds Group, and I work with and look after some of the digital platforms and resources that we have for ILM and City and Guilds.
And to Janice.
Hi, I'm Janice Collins, Endpoint Assessment Partnership Manager for City and Guilds and ILM, supporting centres through endpoint assessment on programme and obviously the successful completion of learners with their apprenticeships.
Excellent, thank you. And just a reminder for those of you joining us as well, if you can post questions and comments in the chat. We're going to leave 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the session. The sessions are being recorded and will be available afterwards as well, but please do ask questions as we go and we'll cover off as many as we can with the remaining time. So we have got kind of three key sections to go through with you today. The first part that we just wanted to start to look at was some of the pressures that we've seen to go digital, and this has taken on a really different kind of feel off the back of what's happened with the pandemic and the fact that we've had a lot of learners that can't access centres and employer locations, but also looking at how the effect of the transformation from frameworks to standards has affected how we're delivering that learning, both online and in kind of face-to-face or one-to-one technology enabled solutions. So we looked at some of the research because you want to go back and you want to see if some of these trends are here for a short period of time or if they're going to establish themselves more permanently off the back of what we're seeing in the change in delivery and the change in our teaching environments. And what we have started to see is that actually 13.7% of workers are in occupations at high risk of automation. So this isn't just about the change that we've seen from working in offices to working at home, and centres being closed, both FE and training provider centres, and that different kind of interaction that we've got to have. There is another change here that we've talked about the AAC before, which is actually around the way that people are going to be working in the future. So we know that actually to support new entrants and people in existing employment to be fully up to date with the way that they can learn, develop and potentially reskill as well, they need to be looking at emerging technology, and that's in education but also within their industries. So those references will be available for you all to see afterwards as well. But there is another lens on this year, and we're all being challenged by it, and we can't see you as a result of some of these changes. So we're living it right now. But the pandemic has really brought a huge change, and Kirsty Donnelly, our CEO, has referenced this a lot in the work that we've been doing, but we have seen a transformation to digital learning that would have taken years happen in 3 to 6 months, which is an incredible opportunity for us as an industry and as educational delivery leads in this business. So it really has started to galvanise some of the changes that we've maybe struggled to adapt to. But with that speed has come an approach that maybe would have taken a longer amount of time. We've moved very quickly, and some of the implications of that are what we want to discuss today. So it's really helped us make that leap, and we know that blended learning is more efficient and can be more effective, but it has to be done correctly. And when you're embedding assessment, which is what we're going to come on to, there are some really, we hope, quick wins and good pieces of advice around distance delivery that we can share with you today. So some of the things that we've been hearing, which I know is what the AAC is all about, is sharing those lessons learned. So some of the conversations that we know our customers have been having are looking at kind of 4 key areas. So how can digital tools remain and be further encouraged and developed after social distancing measures are relaxed? So there are 2 schools of thought at the moment. One is that we will kind of go back to normal, and that human contact is incredibly important. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. And the other one is the efficiencies and things like environmental impact that these changes have really delivered should be here to stay. And we believe that there's actually a happy medium to that. And it's a lot about the different types of audiences and being learner-centric in the way that you're embedding some of these changes. So we also know that the industry is going to predict it's going to shift to digital over the next 2 to 3 years. Well, we've accelerated that. We've already mentioned that. But how are we equipping learners for that changing job market, as well as delivering better while they're on programme? And how are you using your educational technology to equip new and existing employees with digital skills that they need in their future careers? Because that is going to be a change in terms of those skills needs. And what are the challenges that the staff are facing when they're using that technology, and how do we integrate that practice more effectively? So the key findings that we've seen from recent research, so using educational technology in teaching, it does allow students to see how digital skills are needed in the workplace, and they have more of those skills when they're going into the next point of their career. We also know that staff are initially not as confident using new technologies, but we have seen a massive acceleration in skills in assessors and talent coaches across training providers and within colleges as well. There's a constant and consistent support for digital. You can't just deploy it. You need to actually think about how you're managing that internally within your centres. And for both staff and students, it's necessary to show how embedding that technology can enhance their experience. So what's in it for them, because that's how you're going to make it stick. So I'm going to hand over here to Sarah Cooksedge to talk a little bit about how we have done some of that work with our customers.
Thank you, Sarah. So now let's look at underpinning the apprenticeship journey. And this slide really shows the required elements of the journey. And how much of this are you delivering face-to-face, or do you have a blended approach? So really it's about dialing it back to the journey and the requirements that are needed. So how are you delivering maths and English element of the journey? Are you doing an initial assessment or a skill scan with your learner? Do you then create an individualized learning plan with resources to help bridge those learning gaps? And at the lower levels, are you trying to do this digitally, or are you doing it face-to-face? It's just about thinking through these different areas. And what form does your induction take? It's a mandatory element, and how are you covering those elements? And these subjects work particularly well to be shared in an online environment. So blended learning is perfect, and the learner can access them at their own pace. The on-programme element will look different for every standard, dependent on whether there's a mandatory qualification or whether you're doing an optional qualification that sits alongside. And do you deliver this in a classroom environment, or do you purchase digital resources to help with this? I think the most important thing is the tracking of the programme, and for the learner and tutor to be able to evidence their off-the-job hours. What did the learner actually do in this time? Did they attend face-to-face workshops? Did they work through some digital learning, a workbook, or some resources online? And how have you tracked the reviews and interventions? You must be able to show this whole on-programme element of their journey and how it's been tracked. An e-portfolio is a really good way to give great visibility of the learner's journey, and so that everybody knows they're on track. And then when the learner's completed the on-programme element and reached Gateway, Are you as trainers absolutely sure that everything's in place to move on to endpoint assessment? Is there a qualification or an online test required? And have you got all the requirements for a showcase portfolio, for example? Are you absolutely certain the learner's ready? Because that's the key. And is the learner certain too? Can you help them with any resources to help prepare them for their endpoint assessment? These resources tend to be widely available from an endpoint assessment organisation for the learner to complete and really gain confidence for the next step of their journey. And endpoint assessment, what does this look like? Well, Janice is going to talk about that in a few minutes. Are you, as trainers, absolutely clear on the process that the learner needs to undertake? Is it face-to-face? Is it in an online environment? And how soon will you get the results? And what happens next? Will they be waiting for physical certificates? Will it be a digital certificate? Maybe a digital badge to show the skills that they've achieved. Much of this journey can be completed using a blended approach to delivery and using some kind of online platforms. Next slide, please, Sarah. So the COVID pandemic has challenged us all, and it's certainly changed the world of learning forever. With workplaces closing, all training providers and colleges and schools have had to adapt to online learning at pace. Has this been easy? Well, there's been many mistakes along the way, but most providers have worked really well to create a blend of teaching and intervention with their learners. Really, it's a case of deciding what needs to be delivered face-to-face or via an online classroom session, and what the learner can access or complete in their own time on a suitable platform. Need to make it easy for everybody, really. Next slide, please, Sarah. So what is blended learning? Next slide, please, Sarah. What's blended learning and how can it ensure that the learner is on track? Well, the learner will need to have the right equipment initially to ensure they can access anything that you're going to be sending them to complete. Classroom sessions can be run live by tutors with students logging into the platform and joining the session on a platform like Zoom or Microsoft Teams, and they can contribute to the online teaching sessions. But they can also be recorded and accessed by a learner in their own time. And to keep the learner fully engaged, it's not just about sitting watching a screen. It's really important to follow up with drop-in question and answer sessions. And also, if they're using a platform or resources online, can they submit the work to you as tutors or assessors? You need to make sure they've really got a full understanding of the topic area. So it's the same but different. Next slide, please, Sarah. So the changes in learning over the past 18 months really means that we can now make online learning available to a wider audience, and that in theory, learning can become part of every day, available anytime, any place, anywhere. But the design of the courses and resources should make them really easy to follow and be engaging. So it's about thinking back as to what that needs to look like. Most digital platforms allow easy access through a web browser or by using an app, and the learner should be able to request any help or training when required. Next slide, please, Sarah. And last year, I think many trainers, tutors sent their learners away with a huge number of documents to read or access in a platform. And these tended to be the documents that they would normally present in a classroom environment. This can really swamp learners, and some really struggled with engagement, especially when working on an apprenticeship in a frontline job role or environment. And some learners sank, but others flourished. It really depends on their learning style. And I think more recently, we've seen learning resources being designed with online learning in mind, with great explanations and guidance so that the learner truly knows what the assessor or trainer wants them to achieve from that piece of learning. How blended is the learning? How do you plan to do it? Video resources and workbook questions are great, particularly when they're hosted on an interactive platform where the learner can submit their answers, essays, results, and receive easy feedback from the trainer or tutor. Feedback and comments that they can access in a really easy manner. So it really does need to be thought about from a learner's perspective. How can they steadily work through the tasks, topics, information that you might be sending them without feeling overwhelmed? Planning and dates are a great way really to kind of tailor the way that that's done. But some learner engagement can really be massively increased in this environment. And I know we've got a case study from a training provider later that shows how engagement can really be increased. Thank you, Sarah. Back to you, please.
Thanks. So we're going to dive into that a little bit more now and look at some of the different ways that we can deliver some of those needs. So, you know, keeping keeping cohorts and individuals engaged, supporting your assessors, tutors, trainers with the right tools in place. So we're just going to take just lost my clicker. I don't know how that's happened. There we go. So just going to take a little bit of a look at some of the data. I think this is really interesting. So this might be one that you want to pull out later on and refer back to with your teams. But there are some pressures that Sarah's referred to there that are having an impact on people disengaging from some of these changes that potentially could be really beneficial to your educational institutions or businesses. You know, these are more efficient ways of delivering. And if we get them right, we can really up engagement as well. So it's good to understand that some of these things are creating pressures on those learners, as Sarah talked about. Some people are feeling really, really overwhelmed. And this is basically, this is an excerpt from a Deloitte a big piece of work that they commissioned. So we've pulled out some of the main stats that would be interesting for you guys. So overwhelmed hours, you know, the average UK person spends online each day, you know, just looking at some of those pressures that we're now experiencing that just weren't part of our reality 10, 15 years ago. So, you know, the times that we unlock our smartphones each hour, on average, that's 5 times an hour. And then you're thinking about how much work you've got to do in terms of things like assignments and assessments where you really need to focus, but we're also then sending constant reminders that you need to complete your submission to your assessor by the end of the day. So it's just trying to create that space and really thinking about the effect on the learner, but also on your employees, your assessor population, because that is also a lot of administration. The more tech you have, the more tasks you normally have. So really trying to think about some of that stuff, which we'll come on to. Some people, interestingly, this is one that we found really interesting. Today's employees work from several locations, and structuring work in a non-traditional way, it does actually give real benefit to people's lifestyles. And, you know, we've all seen there are extremes on both sides of this, where people have gained back potentially like 5 hours a day in travel, and other people have been in central city locations with very little outdoor space. So there's real disruption to the way that people can work and learn just due to the actual circumstances that they find themselves in. The most interesting bit, though, the rapid change means that everybody does need to learn. So apprentices or not, staff or not, everyone has had to pick up a new skill, and whether that's been about, you know, a change in their circumstances, or being on furlough for 9 months and wanting to learn something new. People have interacted with learning in the last 12 months in a way that we have just never seen in this modern day. And everyone I talk to now, having worked in online and blended learning for a significant period of my career, more years than I'd like to say, I have had more conversations about online learning in the last 12 months than I've probably had with my friends and family in my entire life. So everyone is now interested, and let's try and harness that. out of the back of that, what we've got to really take into consideration is it's got to be on demand. As Sarah said, it's got to be accessible at the right point. We really need to think about that. And it's also got to be collaborative. And that's so key when you haven't got centres open or you've got socially distanced areas. You know, we have to find ways to collaborate and create that sense of community with our learners online. And that's what will make some of this stick. We've done a bit of research and these slides will be available, so I won't go into a huge amount of detail, but we've looked at, you know, what does a modern learner today really want? A typical working week is all that learners have available to them to focus on training and development. So that's 1%. That's not an apprentice, obviously. We wouldn't be doing our jobs if it was. But this type of consumption of information is very different. You know, someone was referencing to me the other day, which I've heard so many times, when we talk to, you know, generations below us about information, we expect, as probably kind of, you know, I'm going to reference people in their late 40s and beyond. I think when I learn something, I have to retain that information. My children do not think that is the case at all. They will just go online because it's probably more accurate than I'll remember it. But that's the way that they're learning. They need to find things. And they're not necessarily completely saving that information in their heads and then kind of interpreting it. So it's trying to find different ways of fitting in with what we see as today's modern learners. And without kind of going into too much detail on this, because there's a lot in here and there's some references in the slides that you'll be able to look at, digital learning has really evolved. You know, gone are the days when, you know, we talked about chalk and talk back in the 90s. So someone stood in the front of a room with an OHP or a blackboard or a whiteboard or whatever we were using at the time, and they wrote things down, people took notes, and then that was learning. And it works. But there are other ways that we need to adapt when we're using technology that allows us to teach in different ways. We moved from, in a corporate training world, we moved into e-learning and then through to talent management. How do we find the best talent and nurture that? And how do we help them through their careers? And recently, in the kind of, you know, 15, 20 years ago, we've thought about continuous learning, which is, you know, working with your colleagues. And actually, that's very much what vocational learning is built around. It's that, you know, you're mentoring, you're shadowing, you're watching someone do it well, and you are then mimicking it until the point when you are capable of doing that yourself. And I think that where vocational learning has got so many lessons to teach the academic routes that we now see, the digital element of it does make it much more sticky. And with that, we get lots more thinking about how do we incentivize that individual to keep coming back. And they do not need to be sitting next to somebody to actually absorb what they're doing on a day-to-day basis through an apprenticeship program. They can be mentored by them online. We can set up more one-to-one situations or group learning. And then we can also document that and turn that into permanent digital learning. So there's lots of different elements there. The platform piece, I'm really passionate about. And if I can encourage you to do one thing, it's to really think about the learner experience in your platforms, because in apprenticeships, we have a lot to do. We've got funding allocations, we've got Ofsted coming in and looking at what we're doing. We've got a lot of administration, and it's so easy to build your learner experience around what you need from them to get them through that process, and to sometimes forget that they need to be incentivized as well, and that is a complex and overwhelming journey for them. So I think the one thing that I would definitely say it's worth looking at with the new world coming in and some of the changes you'll see in some of the platforms in the expos and other areas, those platforms are coming on leaps and bounds, and there's some real benefits there in terms of delivery and learning aligned to assessment, which we're just going to come on to now. So everyone is very keen to determine their own learning now and to set their own pace. And we have an absolute need to deliver structure as part of an apprenticeship program. So we need to think about how technology can support us with that as well. So this thing called learner experience design, LX design, is the process of creating a learner experience that enables the learner to achieve a desired learning outcome, but in a way that suits them, in a way that encourages them and motivates them. And what we're going to just briefly look at now, not take up too much time, is some of these design principles. So this is what I think it would be great if you could go back and have a look at what you're doing with your apprenticeship standards and your program design, and just do a check on each of these 6 areas. You know, Do you really look at it? Does it stand out from the crowd? Do you own that content? Do you have a team that is responsible for looking at your online content and keeping it consistent, keeping it compelling, and understanding what's going to get that learner really engaged? Are your tutors and your trainers and your assessors bought into that content? Do they really buy into it? Are they using it consistently? Is it personalised in the system? Can your system deliver a personalised learner journey? We know Ofsted are now looking at slightly different ways of monitoring what a kind of progress is within the system. Does your system support you in doing that? And is it experiential? Can it adapt to different learners' needs? Some people will really love reading and assignment-based activity. Others will want to do a chat. Can you adapt to all those different learner needs? Apprenticeships are quite goal-based anyway, I feel, but setting those more breadcrumby elements to, you've completed this part, congratulations. Systems are great at giving you those abilities to break up the delivery so that you can see that you're achieving as you go through. And at the end of the day, it's technology, but it's still human-centered. And if it doesn't feel like a good experience, you really have to think about who you're working with, and just really interrogate that supply. Everyone is going to be different. Every business is going to need something different. And to stand out in the marketplace, you also need to be thinking about delivering for your specific learners. So, I'm just a bit of a shout out. We're a bit obsessed with this, but we do know that we've saved a lot of, also brilliantly beneficial for the environment as well. And there was something in the FT, I think Lloyds have cut their carbon emissions by 50% during COVID. So I would encourage everyone to do the numbers and then just shout about it in their own websites and everything. So the benefit of that, though, the benefit of not having to travel around, means that you can actually embed your learner journey in the design of your apprenticeships. And there's some really good top tips in here as well, looking at some of the things that Sarah's talked about. So how are you delivering all of these things through a digital experience, initial assessment, additional support, induction, etc., etc. And that learner journey design, your knowledge, skills and behaviours, how does that look on screen? What does that feel like for the learner? How do they know that they're progressing through it? But breaking it down and making sure you're reusing where you've got potentially communication skills that's in a number of your apprenticeship standards. If it's in the system, you can consistently deliver that module across all of your standards, and then you're actually going to have a better experience for your learners and an easier delivery model for your assessors as well. And there are many benefits to this that, we've talked about a number of them already, but it is about that incentivization. So what's in it for the learner, what's in it for you as a provider, and what's in it for your employers as well, because it's going to be a more efficient model that should be more engaging, and you should get a better conversion rate at the end of your apprenticeships. Embedding assessment, as Sarah talked about, is absolutely key to the learner journey, but it shouldn't be the primary element of what that learner is experiencing. This is about skills delivery and behaviour delivery and knowledge delivery, but it's also about assessment from your perspective, but it should be led by that learner experience with embedded assessment behind it. So all of this great work that ePortfolios do for you in the background just takes that heavy lifting away from you and that kind of more technical conversation with the apprentice that actually can be quite overwhelming, especially in the early days when they've got all of these elements that they need to complete and all of these assessment criteria. So just going to very talk briefly and then hand over to Janice. Cambrian Training, where we actually did a joint presentation with them, which I think is still on our website, and they talked about how they'd adapted incredibly quickly to digital delivery. And they have now almost got everything is being done online, which meant that they didn't have any interruption to their numbers and their kind of progression through the COVID period. And it was a big challenge, but they looked at working with Learning Assistant as an ePortfolio. Other ePortfolios are available, but they looked at working with an ePortfolio to really get that progress exposed to everyone in their business, so that if a learner was with one person that couldn't make a call or an assessment experience with them, someone else could pick that up. Everything was centralized and everything was put online, and they had a very little disruption to their service, but they got there really quickly. So there's some details in there as well. And I would say that if anyone did want to talk to Hazel about embedding an e-portfolio quickly, she is a great person to talk to, and she would talk to probably, I don't know how many of you are out there, but she would probably talk to all of you. She may well be here, but she's an absolute font of knowledge, and she really understood why she wanted to do it and embedded it for the business. So that case study just shows some of the benefits that we've had there in terms of learner engagement. So I am going to hand over now to Janice to talk to us a little bit about exposure of those skills and some of that breadcrumb trail in terms of digital credentials.
Thank you very much, Sarah. If you could just go on to the next slide for me, please. So obviously we've talked today already about how we provide that digital journey during the on programme for the learner, and obviously the benefits of that digital experience. And I do see that working with centres as an endpoint assessment partnership manager, I do really see how it benefits the learner throughout the journey, and how amazingly centres have been able to carry on with learners learning on the job and being able to work either from home and do their assignments, etc., and still be able to achieve endpoint assessment during what's been a very difficult year. And that complements that in terms of how we've switched our endpoint assessment journey to be in one system, but also how we're now actually accrediting those courses that we deliver to be in a more digital way to aid the future. So this just showing you on this slide is our digital credential. So we now provide the learner to their own email address a digital credential for the programme that they've completed. It offers the learner almost an online CV. So the learners have got the benefit of being able to share online through different social media, whether that be Facebook, LinkedIn, or any other of the many social platforms now, what they've actually achieved. So it gives them recognition for what they've done, but it also allows the employer to show how they've supported their learners. We offer digital credentials not only across apprenticeships, but across our other qualifications. And we're even working with employers to assure they're in-house programmes, and therefore then you can have digital credentials that's got not only the company name on, but also City and Guilds brand and also the company branding as well. So it can be used across a number of different platforms, and I think it's the way things are going. It's the old, we all had records of achievements in the past, and I think obviously this is the new record of achievement. It's going to be it's online, and we're not the only organisation that uses digital credentials. I'm seeing them across the board now, and I'm looking through LinkedIn profiles, and it's great to see. If I could have the next slide, please. And this just shows you how this will be embedded for the learner in terms of how they can have a number of different badges and credentials and courses that they've achieved all in one place online. I can see that this is the future, because how many learners come to you and they cannot find their certificates for their English and maths, which is really frustrating. And I can just see this being the way of the future. I can see this happening eventually for the GCSEs and A-levels, where everything is in one place, and those paper certificates, will, I think, over time, not straight away, because I think we all like a bit of paper and we like that certificate, but that will eventually be replaced. I think my daughter, who is in year 11, would much prefer to have everything on her phone than having the piece of paper that mum looks after. Next slide, please. So moving on to our gateway and our endpoint assessment service, we've seen so many changes to our endpoint assessment service over the last 12 months. For those centres that obviously have continued with endpoint assessments, you will have seen that change not only in our delivery of the endpoint assessment, because we've had to rapidly make alterations so that we could allow endpoint assessments to still happen, but also in the technology that we use to get you through that booking process. So it has been a challenge in the last year, but we still have completed a large number of assessments in the last year, which has been amazing. And that's just really been down to the dedication of your teams to be able to create and support those learners through what has been a difficult time, because we didn't know what was going to happen this time last year. It was a very scary time for, I think, everybody in the whole industry and the whole world, really. And we're still in that in that mix now, but I think we're coming out the other side of it. We've been able to adapt. And if you look at all the number of adaptations on the IFA website for apprenticeships, that's been amazing. You know, we've worked really hard with the external bodies to make sure that we could still continue with assessments. Assessments, obviously, for lots of standards have now become remote. And when I think about that, and I think about the challenges that creates for centres and obviously preparing learners. We've now got obviously the hair discretion that's now available for booking for the hair centres. So that is amazing. The learner will go through a different type of assessment because they're used to showcasing those skills, and now they're going to have a professional discussion backed up by a portfolio and to demonstrate those skills instead. So again, the learners are having to adapt, but I know that lots of centres have used technology, the technology of using Teams to help the learners throughout the journey, and therefore that will prepare them for that online professional discussion that they will have. We've seen adaptations to the endpoint assessment for engineering, which who would have thought that we'd now be conducting engineering observations remotely, whereby the assessor is at one end of the technology and the learner is at the other end demonstrating their skills. I think it's just been an amazing for the whole sector how we've been able to adapt our delivery. Next slide, please. And that brings me on to obviously how we've adapted our own journey onto EPA Pro, which I think has been a good move during what has been a difficult year. We're now using EPA Pro for our endpoint assessments. It means that more than one person can access the platform to upload evidence. So it doesn't matter where you are. It's web-based system, so you can upload that evidence to the system. We've got a rapid turnaround of the gateway evidence, much quicker. So we're now 3 days, and your gateway evidence will be reviewed. And then we now hold a planning meeting with the learner and the IEPA to plan that endpoint assessment, to go through those requirements. The plus side for the learner is that it actually supports them. They get to meet the IEPA before the actual day, which from the feedback that I'm getting from customers and learners, they really appreciate that time. It's a small amount of time, but ultimately, if the learner doesn't need that time, then there is that option as well. But I think that planning meeting is a real benefit. And from that planning meeting, everybody gets their diaries out and plans that endpoint assessment and that date. So it's at a date and time suitable for the learner. And generally that takes place within 3 to 4 weeks of that planning meeting, depending on the requirements of the learner and obviously the ability to upload any gateway evidence into the system. And the results come into that system too. So the results are there for each component for you to see within 7 working days. So speeding up that results process for the learner. And they can also access all those support materials in the one platform. So we're not asking you to enter into SmartScreen to get those EPA packs and the resources, any knowledge tests, samples. They're all in that platform, and the learner can view them as well. So it's really aiding that smooth technology from the start of the program and through to the endpoint assessment. Next slide, please.
We have a clicker issue. Hold on 1 second. It's not moving. Ah, there we go. Hang on. Super fast now.
Okay. And I think this is just an example of obviously how we've adapted our approach with CTEC during the pandemic. So we've now quickly worked with CTEC as one of our first organisations, but I know more centres are using it now, is to do those remote assessments. So where centres and assessment plans have got a knowledge test, obviously to begin with, at the beginning of the pandemic, we had that issue that they would normally be done in the centre, but we've worked with technology, we've embraced technology, and we're now offering that as a remote service, and that will be here to stay in some form, and that service will adapt over the coming months, and I know there'll be further updates on that to allow centres, and I know we've had probably thousands now of assessments take place using the remote service for both endpoint assessment and functional skills examinations as well. So we're really adapting our approach because we know technology is here to stay and we're not frightened of it. we're all here to support it and support you as centres through this journey to become in this digital era. So I think just hand back over to yourself now.
Thanks so much, Janice. So we've got about 4 minutes left. I haven't seen any questions come in, so we're just going to wrap up and kind of make our final points. You know, digital first is what we've been referring to for the last 9 months. Because that, well, we haven't had a choice either. But as Janice said, you know, it's not something to be scared of, and there are massive benefits. But in terms of, you know, what we were here to talk to you about today, I think there's just some things that we really wanted to highlight to you. And the first thing I would say, as well as looking at the systems that you've currently got and really thinking about how they are as an experience for your learners and your assessors and tutors. The other thing to really consider is do you need to look back a little bit at the structure of some of your teams, where you may have had people who were processing a lot of paperwork before, and that may now all be coming in through a system or online. Does that need to be more of an online administration skill set? Could that centralized administration function also start to look over the consistency of the content within your systems? Do you have someone that is actually owning that? Do you have someone who owns a refresh of your content on a regular basis, or a review to check that it's doing what it needs to do? Do you have someone who owns the experience your learners are going through within the system? So it's just maybe thinking about some of those extra responsibilities that will mean that you'll get much more value out of your technology and your digital content and your digital delivery. So just trying to think about some of those skill sets. With the resources and the learning experience, like Sarah referred to it, it's the same but different. It's just considering how it's used now and looking at it differently. Not everything needs to be new. Like, there's nothing wrong with being a magpie in what you've already got within your estate. And there are still some fantastic free resources out there and paid for resources out there that would map to what you needed. So I think it's about being a bit creative and understanding that that modern learner that we talked about earlier doesn't expect everything to be 100% mapped to an individual element of their apprenticeship. They will be able to adapt their learning if they're given the context. And that's where your platforms and your learner journey become really important, because you can wrap really lovely pieces of content in the right context and they become much more valuable and they become much more relevant to many different audiences. So really thinking about that learner-centric design. And with the delivery side of things as well, you know, we've seen rapid upskilling of your delivery teams in terms of delivering on digital platforms and blended learning content. Let's not lose that, and let's not leave that as a responsibility to individuals. Make sure you're refreshing their skill sets, you're getting them to go and do some training, you're getting them to use the platforms themselves. You know, some of the time we do come up against some of the challenges with customers that actually the learners are much more familiar and comfortable using things like e-portfolios and LMSs than maybe some of the populations that they're engaging with from a teaching perspective. And that's something I think that has really changed over the last 12 months. Think about support as well, where you've got more technology and more blended learning delivery. Your support models need to look different. So you need some kind of, you know, training materials, drop-ins, expert advice. Certification and what Janice was just talking about, exposing skills as they're going through and making them digital, transferable and visible, are going to be really important as time moves on. And I really do think, you know, the record of achievement, I've still got mine downstairs. I love my record of achievement, but it'd be much easier if it was actually in my LinkedIn profile. Not that anyone would want to see my GCSE results, to be honest. Anyway, and then the last thing is just that development. And thinking about CPD, I think actually with what we've seen in the last 12 months, digital skills we will need to look at that within apprenticeships. I think it is something that, you know, we probably will see some changes coming through, and let's get there first. You know, let's make sure that we are delivering what people need to get through and have the best possible chance of passing their EPA at the end. So we're going to make the slides available. I think the session's over. So thank you very much for joining us. And hopefully we will see you soon. Don't forget, we've got our expo on the stand. Do go back to the browser and you can go back through the website to our stands and our demos and things. So thank you very much for joining us and have a great AAC.